Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to this November 1st special meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize who are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today will be Ms. Karen Robertson. Today's special meeting of Council will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. Question period sign-up sheet is by the double doors and the table to my left for agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding agenda item, please write down your name in the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted the authority to join electronically. I'm not seeing anyone yet, Ms. Robertson, but I'm expecting a couple. We do have quorum in any event. First item is the introduction of late items, and I don't believe we have any. Motion for adoption of the agenda, moved Councillor Prino, seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favour? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. And the first and major and only item of business is a presentation regarding discussions, options for a warming centre. Obviously, there is great community concern as we approach the cold weather. We have not seen the kinds of responses that one would hope in terms of a broad interest in providing these services, but certainly we have one option that's up. Mr. Lindsay, if you have a few comments, and then I'm going to suggest that we hear from Ms. Wood and Ms. Brinkman and Ms. Mercer respecting both the monetary aspects of this and the possibilities.
Thank you, Your Worship. And as this is a special council meeting called by council, there's no staff report that's appearing before you this afternoon or presentation. And although we don't want to certainly get ahead of council in any discussion or debate you may have, but staff have prepared a motion for consideration depending on where your conversation goes this afternoon. I think with any discussion around funding, obviously there comes with that a requirement for council to identify the sources of where we'll fund that from. So Ms. Mercer's here this afternoon. We do have some suggestions if council wants to fund projects where we could take that from and what other options we've looked at. So I don't know if you want to hear from Ms. Mercer now, but at some point in the conversation you may want to get into that discussion and we can touch base on that. Likewise, I've invited Ms. Wood to come forward because I assume through this discussion today there'll be some questions from council about not only what the city did maybe last year in terms of budgeting and service agreements around warming centers, continuing maybe on that conversation we had at the GPC just last week now, but also moving forward, what kind of good neighbor agreements and service agreements we would suggest putting in place just to manage again that earlier recommendation from council about considering neighborhood context and impact on communities. So I'm happy to turn it over to them, Your Worship, or I turn it back to council, and through the discussion we can answer any questions that come up.
Thank you. Ms. Mercer, I gather we can find the funding. Is that fair to say?
Yes, Your Worship, that is correct. We have a project that is under budget by a significant amount of money, and we could fund it from there. Yeah.
Ms. Wood, perhaps you can tell us where we're at or not at, as the case may be.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think just to build on what Mr. Lindsay had said, we came at the last GPC, kind of presented some options. We also gave an update on our pre-season meeting on October 5th with service providers about where their capacity was, what type of services they could offer throughout the winter. And if council will remember, we talked about kind of the three different funding or the three different types, general daytime warming, EMCR threshold, as well as the EWR plan that was presented to council. So we engaged service providers. They provided us a list of what they would be able to offer during the winter. And of course, many of them are offering services just through their general daytime programming and services that they're already offering throughout the year, but opening their doors to folks who may need to come in to warm up. And then of course, Ms. Johnson also presented an option of Risebridge providing some support there as well. So I'm happy to answer questions about maybe services that we offered last year, the types of number of people that were supported, and any other questions that may come up through a good neighborhood kind of agreement requirements.
Thank you very much. Questions for Ms. Wood? Councillor Perino, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just to start this off, so we'd had an email some time ago from our CAO, Dale Lindsay, regarding some of the warming services, which I found very helpful. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to go over that list again of how many places we're looking at for warming centers during the day and what the numbers are. Because my concern, of course, is as we're talking about funding, how many places are actually going to require it. So that's what I'm trying to figure out to the exact number. And because we have, you know, this is live to a viewing audience as well as our guests in the room, and so I want to make sure that everyone knows what we're up against. Thank you.
Through your worship, to Councillor Perino, we do have a list of services and supports that we offer unsheltered individuals on our website. So there we list day use spaces that are available for folks to access, but we also list emergency food provisions as well as emergency shelters. So as reported through Mr. Lindsay's email to council, we have several agencies that are providing drop-in service. So we did mention the library. The library is open to anybody who may need to come in. They've given permission to be listed on our city website to provide that, so along with the hours there as well. And of course, our facilities are also, our lobbies are open for folks who may need to come in to warm up as well. We have a whole list of other agencies that are providing drop-in service. So for example, the Social Center with the Canadian Mental Health Association. I don't have numbers of, you know, what the capacity is for each of those locations, but these are just places that service providers have said, you know, people will be welcome to come in to warm up during their regular programming.
So just as a follow-up, Your Worship, through you to, and feel free to stop me if I'm moving too far, but I'm just looking at, so what are we looking at as far as providing, certainly I know Risebridge has come up in the discussion about funding for them, so I'm just wondering about the other areas.
Sorry, can I clarify that question through your worship? So when you say other areas, are you talking about geographically or
No.
just?
I'm sorry, no, should have been more clear. Some of the other organizations, so for example, some of the confirmed overnight warming centers, because we don't have any funding yet from the government, from the provincial government, is that correct? Nothing we've heard since?
Through your worship. For overnight services, we have been notified that the Nanaimo Family Life Association is offering a temporary winter shelter.
Yes.
Up at St. Peter's, so that will be opening. They have capacity for up to 35.
Yes.
Those are the only additional overnight shelter beds that we have that would be in addition to our regular shelter services that are provided in Nanaimo.
Okay, so are we sorry, Your Worship, I keep going on and
You're the only one on the list, Councillor.
Okay, good. So I'm just wondering about funding as far as, well, let me go back to the daytime center. So you're talking about the city recreation centers as well as the libraries and so forth. Are we providing any funding to any of those organizations for example, snacks or cleaning, recovery, things like that would be normally expected?
Through your worship, to Councillor Perino, so we don't actually have any, we're not providing any city funding for any kind of general daytime warming services or any kind of supports that would be linked to that. Okay. The city does have access to the EMCR funding, the Emergency Management Climate Readiness,
yes.
But that's of course only when we meet thresholds. And that's what we kind of reported back at the GPC
yes.
to council about some possible services that would be, we're exploring those possible services. So that way, when we do hit that threshold, that we may be able to expand services.
Okay, so final question. Are we looking or hoping, I should maybe phrase it that way, for more warming centers during the day? Assuming that we have a few for overnight, are we hoping for more for during the day? Is that request still out there?
Through your worship, yes, the request is still there. We've identified a couple locations, but only for extreme weather thresholds, so not for something that may be open every day. And that's only because that's the only time we would be able to access those funds.
Okay, so thank you so much for answering these questions. My concern is the numbers of people that may be going to Risebridge. That's my concern at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from a technical perspective, Councillor Manley's indicated he's trying to get on my list but can't, so I'll leave that to the technical side of folks. Councillor Manley, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions through you to staff. So, Ms. Wood, you've reached out to the community to different organizations that might be interested in doing warming centers. I'm just curious, are there any other, we received a expression of interest from Rise Bridge, but is there any indication that there's another organization that might be interested?
Through your worship, to Councillor Manley, at the service provider meeting that we had on October 5th, we did have a couple of agencies come forward to offer their spaces. We're still investigating whether they would be appropriate and permitted use, but only for extreme weather. That's what they indicated, was only for extreme weather thresholds.
Okay. Yeah, just my concern, like Councillor Perino's, is Rise Bridge has a capacity just under 50, and we, when 35 people are leaving St. Peter's and 27 people are leaving the Unitarian, and there's already a number of people camped in the parks and sleeping rough in the downtown, it's not going to leave a lot of available space. And so I know that it would end up being somewhat of a magnet for people who are trying to get warming spaces, and I think we actually need more than one in the community. I have a question for Ms. Mercer just about the amount of funding that is available from this project that's coming under budget. We heard approximately in the $200,000 to $250,000 range to run a warming center, and so I'm curious about what kind of funds we have available.
Through your worship, to Councillor Manley, we have just a little over $400,000 in this one project that could be used to fund the warming center. We do have, of course, council's strategic infrastructure reserve. That would limit what you could fund other things in that came up. So there is a couple of options, but the project has about $400,000 that we could access to fund a warming shelter.
And has there been any indication at all from the province that they would help with funding for warming centers? We're hearing, just hearing different things from different communities on the media about the need for warming centers right across the province. So we're not the only ones facing this issue right now. I know definitely Victoria is. So I'm curious about whether there's been any indication from the province about funding.
Your worship, maybe I'll jump in, and because I think it's related to kind of an earlier question that I wanted to clarify. So the short answer is no. I don't believe we have any indication that the province intends to jump into the daytime warming space, especially. Historically, it's been that the province is responsible for funding of overnight shelters and emergency shelters, and then if there is warming spaces, they're generally funded by local governments or grants, like we did last year. And that was part of what I was going to add on to your earlier question about have we gone out looking for people to run daytime warming services. And you remember last year, spring of 2022 and summer of 2022, Ms. Wood was out looking for people to operate because we had grant money and we were able to put money out into the community to run daytime warming. Because we didn't have funding this year, we have not done that same process in terms of putting out any kind of expression of interest or RFP for daytime warming services. And then related to that, I think Councillor Perino had a question about, what have we been lobbying the provincial government for? And I would say since the days of the Health and Housing Task Force, and then, up until very recently at UBCM, every minister you spoke to, part of the message from this council was that you need more overnight shelter funding. So the focus, I would say, of council and the city has been getting money from the province for a much needed overnight shelter beds.
Yeah, I'd say we need overnight shelter beds that can also operate during the day, and that's just not the case with the emergency shelters that we have right now. So it's difficult for organizations to be able to pivot quickly, to be able to respond to weather alerts, checking the weather network to find out whether it meets the emergency measures criteria or not. And so, clearly we have an issue that we need to address for the long term, and I know BC Housing has met with us, and they have some plans that we're very willing to work on, just for the benefit of the public here, that we do need to address this in a more substantive and long-term way. So we're working on those things, but it's not going to happen this winter, is it? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to move that council direct staff to reallocate up to $230,000 from the asset retirement obligation project surplus fund to fund warming center services approximately between November 14th, 2023 and March 31st, 2024, 7 days per week. And enter into a service agreement with Rise Bridge Society to provide warming center services during identified service gaps and mitigate impacts on the surrounding neighborhoods through the Good Neighborhood Agreement requirements.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Eastmere and Councillor Gusselbrock for that matter. Discussion.
If I could just
Councillor
speak
Brown.
to it quickly, Your Worship. You know, it's unfortunate that the magnitude of the problem, both in the numbers of people and the items that people are facing and going through are as severe as they are and increased they are. And I understand traditionally the province does not fund warming centers. If regardless of whether this motion passes or not, there's a follow-up motion I would like to make. But at some point, the problem is not what it was a decade ago, 5 years ago, and a change in approach. But also I think the province is going to have to step into spaces that they normally haven't been. Unfortunately, they haven't yet. And at the same time, there's a real need. And, so to fill that gap, I don't think this is going to cover it all. Excuse me. Not by any means. But it's something and should be followed up with further conversation with the province to continue a lot of the dialogue that has already happened, but also clearly identifying and some additional paths and some additional places the province is going to need to work with us to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gusselbrock, please. Sorry, Councillor Manley.
Thanks, Your Worship. I support the motion. I think the homelessness population is, and the issue with winter sheltering and warming centers, the issue is far outgrown sort of the more intermittent funding that mostly taken on by church groups, and I think that we do need to look at more coordination and consistency, which the province is responsible for. I think right now there is a gap, and we need to intervene in a stopgap measure, because if we don't have something in place this year to fill that capacity during the day for warming, that need to be warm, to use bathroom facilities gets pushed onto the private businesses in the downtown area, just causing further frustrations and perpetuating, already a hard situation for the folks living on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll also support this, but sorry, again, I got a couple of questions. The first one is, so reallocate up to $230,000 from the asset retirement obligation project surplus to fund warming centers. Am I reading that correctly? What? Okay. Approximately between November 14th to March 31st for 7 days a week. I like that. And we're entering into a service agreement. Is that correct? Is that what you're seeing too on it? He went so fast that I didn't catch all of the wording. So we're entering into a, can you put it up on the screen? That would be helpful just to, okay. So thank you, Your Worship. No, I can't see that one, but I can see that one. Thank you. So we're going to be entering into a service agreement with Rise Bridge. Is that going to be the only one then for now? Is that correct? Am I reading that correctly? Is there any others? That's it. Okay. So then my next question is, and Councillor Eastmere will remember this, last week at the meeting, we gave money towards food. I can't remember for what it was for. The 710. So we're going to be continuing, obviously, with funding for food services as well from our other places. Are we going to use the same fund? Or is it going to come from other areas? I'm just wondering where this money's coming from. Councillor Thorpe said an excellent comment last week about where's the money's coming from. You know, this is taxpayer dollars, so I just want to get a grip on where it's, how we're going to deal with these different areas, right?
Through your worship to Councillor Perino. So we have money that we could allocate to other initiatives
Okay.
from this project. So if that was something that council chose to want to pursue, we could use some of this money to fund
Others.
the warming yeah.
Okay. So if we get an,
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. We had, with the food, that was the date, infrastructure, the strategic infrastructure.
Okay.
Reserve. Yeah.
okay, there's so many different funds.
Yeah.
So if we happen to have another warming center that comes forward, Your Worship, is it possible then that we could consider this kind of, to expand this gift to another center? Is that the idea? I mean, that would actually be my hope, because I think it's going to be a lot of pressure on Risebridge.
So after this, there would be, 170,000 left in the project. And that, coupled with strategic infrastructure reserve, could fund another warming center.
Okay. So just my comments, and the reason why I'll be supporting this is anyone living on the street does not know when it's cold enough to go to these other places. This is the part that gets me. We're only going to help out in the extreme, or when the government talks about the extreme. Well, no one living on the street is going to know that this day is more extreme than the other. So this day I'll go to that place, or this day I'll go to this place. It makes no sense. This is a far better option, and I appreciate that staff have brought this forward, and thank Councillor Brown for getting the wording correctly. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. In order, Councillors Hemmens, Thorpe, and Eastmere, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Similar line of questioning, I think, and I just want confirmation. So I'm in support of the motion for all of the reasons we know. I do want to note the proposal from Risebridge is to accommodate 48 people. Our recent point-in-time count marks 512 people living on the street, and if you speak to anyone doing work on the streets, it's closer to 800. So this is a drop in the bucket, but I think it's something that we can't not do. My question is, what's next? And if we have funding through the asset retirement obligation surplus, would we put out a call for other operators to come forward in other areas of the city to offer similar services? Like if we're already merging into this space, which we generally don't go into for all the reasons that have been stated, if we're in this space, how far in can we be here?
Through your worship to Councillor Hemmens, we could absolutely issue an EOI like we did last year if we know that we have access to some funds. Like Mr. Lindsay mentioned last year, we did that process because we knew we had the Strengthening Communities Fund. This year we did not do the same process because we only had knowledge that we had access to EMCR funds when the thresholds were met. So if council wants to direct staff to do that, we could do that.
Thank you. And if I could just, for my understanding, so we knew we didn't have funding for this year, so we did not put out an EOI. However, we met with service providers in early October, and we heard from both Risebridge and 710 that they have capacity with some restrictions. And then Risebridge offered an opportunity to run this. I'm curious and cautious that we're not also offering this opportunity to other providers who may have that capacity. Can I have any staff comment on that, please?
Through your worship to Councillor Hemmens, at the pre-service meeting, even though our intent of that meeting is part of our emergency planning for EMCR funding, we do ask about space and if people have capacity to do that. And at that meeting, for instance, Risebridge did share that they would be able to provide a general daytime warming center. We had a couple of other agencies come forward, but they indicated only for EMCR. So I think there's some differences because it is a big commitment. And so we didn't have a specific ask about something that would have stable funding. So I think that it would be fair for us to go back and ask that question again. But we do have a listing of agencies who provided space options depending on the timeline of commitment.
Okay, thank you for that. And I just want to reiterate, obviously a very needed service. We have a service organization who's approached us and said we can do this, but I do have some reservations. There are other service providers in the community. If we knew that this money was able to be freed up in this way that we seem to be freeing it up today, that I would like other service providers to be able to have a voice in saying, hey, we could also do that. So I'm just sharing that, but again, I'm going to support the motion as is. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we get further into debate, I just want to ask the question. The wording of the motion as I read it is that we're allocating up to $230,000. We're authorizing the corporate office to enter an agreement with Risebridge, but that doesn't prevent us from using part of the $230,000 to enter into agreements with other providers. Am I misinterpreting this?
You're correct, Your Worship. It was written that way, although I will say the budgets that we're seeing, both that were presented at your SPO and the tentative budgets that we received from Risebridge, would use a significant portion of that money. So approximately, I'm just based on the numbers that have been provided, 200,000. So we're suggesting to leave a little bit of room in there for that exact scenario to allow us to engage with others when there's key points where there's key needs. But if council wanted to increase that number, that would allow us to go back out and work with our partners and bring back options to council. But that's certainly up to council.
I very much appreciate the concerns that have been raised so far, and I'll get to Councillor Thorpe and Eastmer and Manley in a second or two. But I'm somewhat hopeful that the media coverage of this, and I'm relying on the community generally, will draw attention to this, that there may be other providers in the community, and it's no disrespect for Risebridge when I say that, but simply because putting all your eggs in one basket is making an assumption that everything will be fine, and that they may not well be able to deliver the level of services that are necessary to the broad number of people who are required. So that's why I just wanted to clarify this. So pardon the interruption in the flow here. Councillor Thorpe, then Councillor Eastmer, then Councillor Manley.
No, thank you very much, Your Worship, and I appreciate your questions and comments, because I share those thoughts, and also the comments of Councillor Hemmons. First of all, I really appreciate Mr. Lindsay and staff suggesting wording for this potential motion, which Councillor Brown has moved, and I do support it. I'm also really pleased that staff have been able to identify a funding stream to at least start to tackle this problem, which is a very real problem. And although I always hesitate to step into areas which I feel is downloading from the provincial government, I have to say that apparently from what Mr. Lindsay tells us and what I know from past, that daytime warming centers have never been a provincial responsibility or seen as such. So I am willing to step into this space. In terms of providers, I share some of the concerns that have been raised. We don't seem at this point to have identified a lot of options. If we were to do so for future, keeping in mind that we will never totally be able to solve this need in our community, then I would want to examine those options when those come forward from staff, along with the funding possibilities there. But one step at a time, and I think today is a good step. I would ask, though, through you, Your Worship, to staff that any such agreement which is signed with a provider, I'm assuming would have very strict rules regarding accountability, not only in terms of the good neighbor policy and relationships, but also in terms of monetary accountability, where the money goes, how it's used, and so on. And I look to staff, if I may, just for confirmation that that would be part of any agreement.
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Thorpe. That is a standard of practice that we've been utilizing with our service agreements, especially for complex social services that may have an impact on the neighborhood. Really looking for communication with the neighborhood. For instance, last year we did require service providers to send a letter out to the neighborhood with contact information. We also asked for collaboration to troubleshoot any issues that might happen in the neighborhood with police or with their community safety officers. And then we do require invoicing based on the budget, and the budget actually goes as part of the service agreement, and so we use that as a way to monitor that.
Thank you, because as Councillor Perino quite rightly pointed out, this is taxpayers' money that we are using, and we're using a fair chunk of it to start to deal with this problem, but certainly we need to be assured that taxpayers are getting value for their money and we're not causing other unforeseen problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eastmere, please.
Thank you. Through you, just first a question to Ms. Mercer. What project is it that's under budget that we're drawing these funds from?
Through your worship, to Councillor Eastmere, so we have an asset retirement obligation project. So it's a new accounting standard that comes into effect for 2023, where we have to estimate the cost of doing remediation work to our city buildings at the date we get rid of them. So our initial projection was $2.3 million, because at that point we hadn't completely finished all of our calculations. So we chose the upper limit of what we estimated, and that was what was in the budget. So we've recently finished all of the calculations. Our auditors have reviewed it and they're happy with it, and it came in more like 1.8, 1.9. So that's where the excess surplus came from.
Okay, appreciate that information. Yeah, I'm definitely in support of this motion, and I'm also glad that Councillor Hemmons brought up the possibility of putting out an EOI again, just to see if there's other operators that are out there. And I think that what happened with the city this year is we were waiting for that report from the systems planning organization. I think we were really hoping that that would identify actual locations that would be ready to operate, and that didn't end up being what we were hoping for, that information that came back. So I think it does, again, fall to the city to kind of lead on this, and we can't just, leave it up to the media to cover this meeting, because the media is a shadow of what it once was. And so I think, yeah, we need to take the responsibility and put it out there that we do potentially have more funding, up to $400,000 even. So I think we're also hearing from people in the community who are really, really concerned about our unhoused neighbors not having any kind of a warm place to go during the day, let alone at night. And I also wonder if there's a second part of this conversation, acknowledging that we have very few shelter spaces compared to the number of unhoused individuals. And even if we fund a couple warming spaces, there's still going to be a lack of spaces for them to go. So we may, I think, need to have a conversation about how we take a mindful approach to enforcing bylaws during the cold weather for people who may be camping or living outdoors, maybe camping in city parks, maybe sheltering in vacant doorways at night. And I know that our CSOs have a responsibility for ensuring the downtown is a safe and welcoming place for everyone, but I know that there's been instances lately when we've had really, really terrible weather at night, and they've been out there by our own direction, forcing people to leave vacant doorways in the middle of the night, and they have nowhere else to go. So I think that we do need to have a conversation about whether there is a way that we can mindfully take a different approach to enforcing bylaws when it's cold, to ensure that we're not breaking down encampments, we're not seizing tents or anything like that from people who simply have no other place to go. And I'd be interested to hear from our Director of Bylaw Services if that's something that's already happening, because I know that we do our best to take a mindful approach on these things, but is there something more proactive that we can do? Is there specific direction from council that could be needed to help take a different approach on that? And what can we do that will make enforcement of sheltering in parks look different when it's cold out?
Mr. LaBerge, well, Ms. Robertson first, and then...
I was just thinking it might be appropriate just to deal with the motion that's on the table first, and then look to have a further discussion.
Okay.
Perhaps we can get an answer to your question in a bit then, and we'll finish with the motion. Or I'm quite happy to have the question answered now, actually.
Okay.
And I'm the chair, so I get to make those decisions. Thank you. Mr. LaBerge, please.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, points are really well taken, and the community safety officer program was developed with officers that both have enforcement and outreach, clinical outreach experience, and the mandate is to provide appropriate supports for the unsheltered people in the community. The majority of the time, the CSOs is actually taken in wayfinding and supporting and in wellness checks, and they gather clothing and things to keep people safe and warm in extreme weather. So to suggest that they're being disrupted or moved, or that these things are being taken away during inclement weather is actually the antithesis of what these officers are doing. Respect the comments and the concerns. I don't think that any direction is needed from council to change the approaches. When it comes to sheltering in parks, you know, there is a constant scanning of the environment, and I think what the enforcement officers strive to do is make sure that encampments don't get entrenched and they build up with accumulations of items that bring fire hazards, environmental hazards, or a state of permanence that we can no longer manage. But then it does not enable other park users to use those spaces. So everything is always trying to strike a reasonable balance. Those instructions are very clear to the community CFD officers, and I can say with confidence that that's the measured approach that they're taking.
Thank you. And Mr. Laberge, I think it's important to mention at this point that people need to appreciate what an enormous challenge the bylaw officers and the CSOs in this community, the RCMP and everyone else faces on the front lines every day, dealing with very challenging situations and having to make judgment calls about people's safety and security and all of the factors you've mentioned. And so let me just express on behalf of council and the citizens of the city gratitude for all the work that is done every day. It is not work personally that I could ever have the patience or the strength to undertake, and I think that needs to be recognized. Thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. And
Oh, pardon me, Councillor Manley, sorry. I really wish we could get that fixed so that when Councillor Manley wants to speak, his name could come up in this rather expensive
It turns
system.
on my mic automatically. I could just butt in, but that wouldn't be very parliamentary of me, would it? I'd like to thank staff for bringing forward this proposed motion. I'd like to amend it to include that a further call for expressions of interest be posted for organizations willing and able to run an additional warming center or additional warming centers in Nanaimo. And if additional sites are found, that additional funds be allocated. I think that, yeah.
Is there
a seconder?
We have a seconder, Councillor Perino.
And then just like to speak to it that I think just with the number of unhoused people in our community, as Councillor Hemmons has rightly pointed out, that the capacity for Risebridge is just not going to be there in terms of the number of people that are going to be seeking warmth on cold, wet, miserable days. And the impact on this one particular neighborhood is going to be extraneous. And I think we need to share the load a little bit in the community. We have unhoused people north to south in Nanaimo, and I would hope that some of the building owners that have vacant properties, some of the faith-based organizations, and other organizations would look at this and step up, because we do need assistance in this community, and people that are unhoused in this community need assistance. And you know, we're seeing a lot of seniors, people with disabilities, working people in our community that are struggling with homelessness right now. It's not just what people see on the street around the overdose prevention site or 55 Victoria. It's throughout the community, and a lot of people are struggling, and I just hope that the community will step up and assist, because one small organization with one small building is not going to be able to carry the weight. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hemmons, then Councillor Thorpe, please.
thank you, Your Worship. I just want to reiterate your gratitude to bylaw staff, and I think to everyone working in this space. It's a very, the dynamics of the last 5 years of serving this population have changed dramatically, and it is a resource-starved sector that is working with pennies for the job that they are being asked to do. I just want to put some data around the point to Councillor Eastmears about our unsheltered population and why funding is inadequate and inequitable. And so if you, 512 of our, those counted living on the streets, we have 78.4% of those don't have anywhere to go at night. Whereas in Vancouver, where they have 5,000 people, only 30% of their population doesn't have anywhere to go at night. So when we went to UBCM and we sat down with the Premier and we said, we are absolutely desperate for shelter beds, we need to reiterate that again, and again, and again, and again, because it's inequitable and it's damaging our entire community. That wasn't actually the question I had, that was just rambling. Through to Ms. Wood, last year was the first year that we provided funding for warming centers. Did we have any evaluation in place?
Through your worship to Councillor Hemmons, we did require some data reporting from the 2 warming centers that we funded through Strengthening Communities. So if that's what you mean by monitoring or evaluating, maybe you can clarify that for me.
I think evaluation should go a little bit beyond data and head counts, and I would be personally very curious if we are stepping into this space, and it appears that we are, that we have an evaluation framework so we understand the neighborhood impacts, and also the intersection between service providers. I would be very curious. I would be very curious for those who we fund to understand how they integrate and support the broader service sector. I just worry about siloing and people fighting for funding because there isn't enough. And I'm just very aware of the challenges that particularly those living around Chapel had last year and the present delegations we had as a result. So if this moves forward, I would be very pleased to see a more robust evaluation framework in place. Thank you.
Thank you. We are on the amendment, and I'm just wondering if anyone wants to speak specifically to that. And if not, let's call for a vote on the amendment. You want to speak to the amendment, Councillor Thorpe?
Please, Your Worship, and I would appreciate clarification on the wording of the amendment because I just partially heard it. So if it could be repeated, please.
Councillor Manley, please, if you can.
I think I sent this to Mr. Lindsay. It's to add that a further call for expressions of interest.
Sorry, add where?
Add at the end of the.
At the end, okay.
At the end, yeah. So.
Thinking of the drafters.
Point 3.
Point 3, thank you.
That a further call for expressions of interest be posted for organizations willing and able to run additional warming centers in Nanaimo. And 4, if additional sites are found, that additional funds be allocated. We may be looking at a couple of smaller spots. We might be looking at a larger spot that we seek additional sites.
I don't think, in fairness, Councillor Thorpe, sorry, that we can speak to add additional funds without a specific number, but I just, before you proceed, Councillor Thorpe.
Your Worship, our comment was going to be the same thing, and I think the intent would be if that motion was passed, that we would obviously go out and work to identify additional projects, and then we would do the same process. We'd bring them back to council and suggest the budget, and we'd provide you options of how to fund those initiatives. That's one option. Of course, the other option is always that council can predetermine monies ahead of time, but I think staying with the intent of that motion would probably be the first option if we understand.
So instead of allocated, identified. Instead of funds, that additional funds be allocated, additional funds be identified, or potential additional funds be identified.
Thank you, and I'll try not to interrupt you again, Councillor.
No, thanks, Your Worship. It's all good because that's exactly the point I wanted to focus on because I wasn't comfortable with that additional funding be allocated. But I think the revised wording is satisfactory to myself, so I will support the amendment. And if I may, with your indulgence, I will just say that I have nothing but absolute respect for the work that our bylaw department does and their compassion that they show towards dealing with a very difficult situation in our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Armstrong, on the amendment? Yes. Yep, please, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that amendment's very important because I think we do need to find other resources. And to those that are in the community, I think even if you say that you can take in 10 people or 20 people, I think that's very important for us to hear about, because if we had 10 organizations willing to take in 20, that gives us 200. So I think it's really important that if you represent an organization and you do have that ability, to please let us know and please bring that forward to us, because from my perspective, it's really important because people are going to die. And the other thing is, even in taking beds up in the hospital when they shouldn't be doing that, when we can actually keep them healthier so they don't have to go there. So for me, I'm very supportive of these motions. And again, I would really ask those that are in the service industries, even if you can take in 10, please send us an email saying, we're able to do this, rough idea of what the cost is going to be, because for me, I think that even helps us with the dispersion problem as well as the good neighborhood agreements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the amendment then, all those in favor? And any opposed? None. Motion carries. So we're back on the main motion as amended. I'm not seeing anyone else. I want to say a couple of words here. And I'm going to start with my incredible resentment that in 2023, the City Council of Nanaimo even has to consider spending money on something which is clearly a provincial / potentially federal responsibility. And I'm going to play with a couple of numbers here and rounding up and down, so forgive me. We represent roughly 1% of the province's population. A ballpark, I think the provincial budget is over $60 billion annually now. 1% of that budget would be roughly $6 billion. Pardon me, $600 million. $600 million. We are being, it's suggested today, we spend, our budget's roughly $200 million, spend what will amount to 1/10 of 1% to provide warming centers. You can argue it's not a lot of money, and it isn't for the benefit that is received and the lives it may save. But 0.1% of, quote unquote, our share of the provincial budget, arguably, would be $62 million. And I throw these figures out not to baffle anybody or confuse anybody, but this is at its heart a provincial responsibility. The solutions that will deal with the significant problem of people suffering from addictions and mental health and trauma and brain injury are not going to get solved by cities providing warming centers or providing food through the numerous charities. And to add to what I said earlier, all of those organizations in this community, including Risebridge, the churches, the various nonprofits who continue to provide services and assistance, all the good work they do is not going to fix this. It is not going to make that much difference. And so I come back to my point around my resentment, not that my emotions in this discussion matter, but I suspect I speak for many in this community who are resentful as well and tired and emotionally drained with having to see so many of our fellow citizens. And I'm going to pick out someone I've known for a long time who sagely just nodded, former Councillor Fulla, at my remarks. It's getting a bit tiresome. It's getting a bit tiresome. I will and happily support this. Clearly the province isn't going to step up and do it. The federal government isn't going to step up and do it. And yet we're the people who represent the folks who pay for the services provided in this city by paying property taxes, not based on income tax, not based on taxes, progressive income taxation. It's based on property taxes and fees and licenses and a few other sources. This is not the way to deliver these kinds of public services, and the fact that we need to deliver these kinds of public services, shelter spaces and warming centers for, in this community, hundreds and hundreds of our fellow citizens, and across this province, thousands of fellow citizens, is to me the ultimate condemnation of where we have allowed ourselves, and I take my full role in it as well collectively, to get to in the 21st century, and it is appalling. So I want to express my thanks to all members of council who've spoken today. I think we all know how this vote is going to go. It is what we can do. It is not what we should be doing or have to do, but that is the role that we have been given in the circumstances. It is either this or we just leave. As Councillor Hemmons has pointed out, none of us really believe just the straight count. Otherwise, we leave 800 of our fellow citizens out there in the streets with no place to get warm during the day. Councillor Perino has expressed it well today. Frustrating as this is, so I'm not going to dribble on any longer, but I will say that I hope the province hears us as the province hears from other British Columbians who are all getting tired. I suspect there is a reason that we are not seeing numerous not-for-profit agencies and other helping groups and churches step forward, because precisely this is extremely challenging work. And we are dealing with a population, and I'm not going to get on my usual hobby horse about secure and voluntary care for the worst cases, but we are dealing with a population that is hurt and damaged, and to use a term that doesn't really work, but it's the only one that comes to my mind, broken, and need to be fixed. And we're not going to fix it by doing this today, but at least we are hopefully providing an opportunity for some folks to survive to the day when we will finally, our emotions, if you will, our compassion will be overcome finally by senior governments who will commit the resources that are necessary to give some hope to those in the streets, but as Councillor Gesselbrock pointed out, those in our community who operate the businesses, who deliver the services, those in our community who continue to try and keep order in our society at the most frustrating time of all. I thank you for your indulgence, and if I haven't inspired anyone to say anything else, all those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Council, everyone. I do appreciate this. We have no... Councillor Brown, sorry, you're just a tiny dot on the screen this time.
That's okay, Your Worship. Thank you for noticing me nonetheless. I would just like to propose a follow-up motion. I had emailed council a small item, but if you will permit it, I would like to move that correspondence be sent to Premier Eby outlining the continued and severe health needs of unsheltered populations in Nanaimo and the community-wide need for provincial funding that matches the scale of the crisis for programs and shelter space for the unsheltered populations in Nanaimo.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. I saw a rush of hands for that one, Councillor Brown. Is there any...
Self-explanatory, but just to keep the dialogue open and the pressure up on a lot of need, a lot of the work that's being done without the appropriate funding by members of our community, and that the quicker we respond to the genuine health need, the quicker that some of the impacts of not dealing with folks' health needs will lessen on the greater community. Thank you.
Thank you. It won't be our first letter, that's for sure, but never hurts to send more. Councillor Perino and then Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just very quickly through you, of course, I'll support this motion. Couldn't agree more. Councillor Brown, thank you so much for bringing it forward. I just wanted to say there are several members from Risebridge in the audience and as well from 710, and you know what, Premier Eby, without these people being here to step in to help this desperate need that we have for the members of community that don't have a voice, thank goodness for you. We couldn't do this without you. So Premier Eby, no matter what you do, our community is going to be there to help those the most in need. So just saying, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is going to be a longer term and a persistent problem that's definitely outgrowing the scale of response that's been in the past on the shoulders of nonprofit and church groups. And I think that we need the funding in place and start building out the infrastructure and also the capacity of a labor force that can meet the need right now that is persistent on the streets and the folks living with homelessness, so that we can get the problem under control and start being able to move past that into the transition of what's going to come back next, and finding people housing and getting them out of this situation that is causing the problems in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other speakers. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Anything further? If not, no other business. I'm going to assume nothing for question period. Motion to adjourn. So moved. Councillor Perino, seconded. Councillor. Actually, Ms. Gurry, I think we have an item we can perhaps deal with in camera. Is that probably the fair way to go in the circumstances? You're conscious of it?
Your Worship, I think that it could be dealt in camera, and you could have a procedural motion to move in camera, and that just might make things simpler, and then the auditorium could be cleared.
Okay.
In that way. So if you could have a procedural motion, and it would be 91. I might get Ms. Robertson to help me out here. It's either A or B and or M, which is other matters that would be closed under another enactment. You might want to use that as your procedural motion to go in camera.
So moved. Councillor Hemmens, seconded Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you, audience, for attending today.
So, Your Worship, I'm still on Zoom. I'm